Syrian government forces have launched a counterattack against Islamist-led rebels around the key Syrian city of Hama. This comes nearly a week after President Bashar Assad's forces suffered a string of significant losses. The insurgents have already captured large stretches of territory in the north, including Syria's second largest city, Aleppo. Tens of thousands of people are fleeing the fighting as the UN warns of a major humanitarian crisis.
An exodus of civilians, just as winter is setting in. With the Islamist-led rebels advancing and government forces backed by Russia intensifying their airstrikes, ordinary people are caught in the crossfire. The UN is raising the alarm over the impact of hostilities on the Syrian population.
Our office has documented a number of extremely concerning incidents resulting in multiple civilian casualties, including a high number of women and children, stemming from attacks by both Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, or HTS, and by pro-government forces.
Of particular concern is the fate of Syria's Kurdish minority. Among the rebels are Turkish-backed insurgent forces who have been fighting Kurdish groups in northern Syria. Despite assurances by the rebels that Kurdish civilians will not be harmed, witnesses report being targeted by pro-Turkish gunmen.
We were attacked by armed militias. They displaced us against our will. They started to threaten people, saying they would kill and behead them, so we left. They were saying that they will behead all Kurds. They were telling us terrible things.
Meanwhile, fierce fighting is underway close to the key city of Hama. The Syrian government has launched a counteroffensive to push back the rebels. The battlefield is crowded in northern Syria, with numerous state-sponsored and non-state actors all involved in the renewed fighting. It's a reminder of the messy global politics at play in Syria's long-running civil war.
And we can talk more about the global politics at play in Syria's war. I'm joined now by Aaron Stein. He's a president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Aaron, good to have you on DW. Now, Russia and Iran were vital in helping Damascus previously regain control of most of the country. Will they be able to help Assad again this time around?
It feels like we're at the very beginning of when the Russians and the Iranians intervened in the Syrian civil war. And they initially intervened because they wanted to prevent the collapse of the Syrian regime. It was only after they stabilized the front lines that they went on offense to try and take back some territory, which they were ultimately successful in doing. So I expect in the next couple, let's say 72 to 96 hours, an increase in Russian airstrikes, perhaps reports of Iraqi militias that are under the control or at least the sway of Iran moving into the conflict to try and ensure that Hama and anything south of it will not collapse further and that the regime will not totally lose control.
On the other side, the Islamist militant group that is leading the rebels, HTS, is supported by Turkey. You have written extensively about Turkish foreign policy. So what do you think Turkey's endgame is here?
Well, I want to be clear. I don't think Turkey is exactly pulling the strings on everything that's happening in Syria. If I had to guess, the Turkish government was, one, aware of what was about to happen, but two, caught off guard by the rapid collapse of the Syrian regime. And so they're rushing to figure it out just like we are. HTS is sort of a wild card. They aren't directly under Turkish control. And so I think the challenge that Ankara is going to face is that they would rather prefer to hash this out with the Russians as the point of contact for Bashar al-Assad. And as part of that outreach to Bashar al-Assad, to ensure that the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds out in the northeast of the country, don't gain any more autonomy or sort of gain more control over territory along the Turkish-Syrian border that Ankara views as a security threat.
So it looks like here are two scenarios, right? Either an Islamist militant group with a jihadist ideology takes over power in Syria, or Assad stays on, an authoritarian leader accused of torturing opponents, who's wanted for alleged complicity in war crimes. At this point, which is the more likely outcome?
I think the most likely outcome is eventually the front line will stabilize, the Russians will intervene, and the opposition, that includes HTS, will control more territory, and that Turkey and others will try and wrest concessions out of the regime to sort of negotiate directly with these opposition movements. The regime has never, under any circumstances, contemplated really making concessions. And so I think you see, the most likely outcome here is somewhere in the middle, which is this conflict continues, albeit without a satisfactory end for any of the parties. Because we have to remember, the people that are most messed up, or at least that faces the largest consequences from this, are just normal folks who can't escape the conflict. They were just trying to live day-to-day lives in a conflict zone now going on over a decade.
Yeah, and tens of thousands have already been displaced in this last bout of fighting. What could the regional consequence, now zooming out, of what's happening in Syria at the moment be?
You have a really interesting dynamic in that one of the challenges Iran is facing is that it's been beaten down and hit very hard by the Israelis, stemming from the Israeli reaction to the October 7th attacks coming from Gaza. We just saw sort of the ceasefire, or sort of quote unquote ceasefire. I'm not clear if it's going to stay in place. And so you have a weakened Iran and regional dynamics where the ability of any external actor to really direct this conflict will be challenging.
Mm-hmm. That was Stein from the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Thank you so much.